New evidence suggests it was not just an iceberg that doomed the Titanic. More than 1,500 people died when the ship, considered unsinkable, plunged into the Atlantic Ocean more than 100 years ago.
The lights of the drone cut through the black water, illuminating the rusted steel of the most famous ship in the world. We have been obsessed with the Titanic for a century. But this time, the camera caught a detail on the starboard side that no one expected to see. It suggests that a massive cover-up happened in 1912 to hide a fatal flaw in the ship's design.
Well, say Titanic, and you do think icebergs and human folly. But according to a new theory based on some new evidence, to the ice, we can add fire.
This was not just a tragedy of nature. This was human arrogance costing 1,500 lives. And the proof is right there on the ocean floor, staring back at us. The drone sees the truth. The footage from the drone is haunting. As the lights sweep over the starboard side of the Titanic, you can almost feel the ghosts of the past. But getting down here was not just a sightseeing tour. The mission was to analyze the hull plates with modern technology, and what the sensors picked up is absolutely wild. We have always been told that the Titanic was the victim of bad luck and a massive iceberg. But here is the catch. The drone scans focused on a specific section of the hull where old photographs taken before the ship even left Southampton showed a strange dark mark.
Titanic's lookouts are staring ahead at the calm ocean, and then they notice a dark object.
For years, experts ignored this mark. They thought it was just a shadow or a smudge on the camera lens. But the new data suggests that a massive fire had been burning inside one of the coal bunkers for weeks before the maiden voyage. Imagine that. The ship was literally on fire while passengers were walking up the gangway, completely unaware that they were stepping onto a furnace. The heat from a coal fire like that can reach temperatures of over 1,000 degrees. When steel gets that hot, it loses its strength. It becomes brittle. So when the Titanic left the dock, the integrity of the hull in that exact spot was likely reduced by up to 75%. This changes the entire narrative. It implies that the ship was already wounded before it even saw the ocean. The iceberg did not need to hit the ship hard, it just needed to brush against this weakened soft spot to tear it open like a zipper. The drone footage confirms that the damage along the side is not a clean gash, but a series of punctures where the metal just gave up. It is not that simple, though. This fire theory connects to the speed of the sinking. If the steel was strong, the ship might have stayed afloat long enough for rescue ships to arrive. But because the metal was compromised by weeks of intense heat, the water rushed in way faster than the mathematicians on board calculated.
What we do know is only based on the survivor testimony from 1912.
The designers had created 16 watertight compartments. It sounds safe, right? They called it unsinkable. But the drone images of the interior wreckage show exactly why that label was a lie. The walls of these compartments, known as bulkheads, did not go all the way up to the main deck. They stopped short. Think of it like an ice cube tray. If you fill one cube with too much water, it spills over into the next one. That is exactly what happened. As the bow dipped lower, the water flowed over the top of each barrier, flooding the ship from front to back. It was a domino effect of water weight that no one could stop. Basically, the ship was designed for a specific kind of accident, but not this one.
The front of the ship, because it's full of so much water, is dipping in underneath the surface. The pressure of all the water from the front, mixed with the weight of the propellers in the back, causes the ship to snap in half.
The arrogance of the builders made them believe that a breach of more than 2 compartments was mathematically impossible. But the ocean does not care about math. The drone shows us twisted metal that looks like it was ripped apart by a giant hand. This is not just rust, it is evidence of violent force. The passengers on the upper decks felt a slight vibration. They went back to their drinks and their card games, thinking nothing of it. But down below, deep in the belly of the ship where the drone is now hovering, the ocean was roaring in at a rate of 7 tons per second. The fire had done its job. It had prepped the ship for destruction, and the iceberg was just the trigger. Everyone is obsessed with the lookouts and the missing binoculars. We will get to that. But the real crime might have been letting the ship sail with a fire in its belly. The owners knew about the fire. They ordered the stokers to shovel coal from that bunker first to hide the evidence and put the fire out. but by moving the coal, they might have actually fed the flames with more oxygen. It is a tragic irony. In trying to hide the problem, they likely made it fatal. The drone moves along the side of the ship, passing the rows of portholes. Some are still open. It is eerie to think that people looked out of those windows, seeing the calm Atlantic, not knowing that the steel holding them up was slowly failing. The data we are gathering now paints a picture of negligence on a massive scale. It was a perfect storm of corporate greed, engineering oversight, and bad timing.
So you have a large, heavy concentration here due to the engines, but you have a large, heavy concentration here due to the water.
The story we tell ourselves about the Titanic is usually one of romance and tragedy. But the cold, hard data from the bottom of the sea tells a story of industrial failure. The ship was a prototype, and like many prototypes, it had bugs. The problem is that these bugs cost 1,500 people their lives. As the drone finishes its scan of the damaged hull, it turns its camera toward the debris field. And what it finds there raises even more questions about the final moments of the ship. The drone turns, revealing a field of debris that hides a dark secret.
All of that debris, I saw shoes, the pairs of shoes that were the final remnants of those who perished and without life jackets fell to the bottom.
Money over safety, the real cost. As the underwater drone moves closer to the separated plates of the hull, we start to see the microscopic details that the history books missed. It turns out that the Titanic was held together by 3 million rivets. These are the small metal pins that bind the massive steel plates together. For a long time, we assumed these rivets were the best money could buy. I mean, this was the ship of dreams, right? You would not use cheap parts on a floating palace. Yeah, about that. The analysis of the metal recovered from the debris field and the close-up images from the drone suggest a different reality. The shipyard was building the Titanic at the same time as its sister ship, the Olympic. This put a huge strain on the supply chain. They needed millions of rivets fast, and when you need things fast, standards sometimes slip. The drone captures images of rivets that look like they were sheared off cleanly. This indicates that the iron used in these rivets had a high level of slag, impurities that make the metal weak. In the freezing waters of the North Atlantic, this low-grade iron becomes brittle. When the iceberg hit the hull, it did not slice through the steel plates like a knife. That is a myth. What actually happened was much more violent. The impact caused the plates to flex. Good rivets would have stretched and held on, but these cheap rivets just popped. Bam, bam, bam. Like a machine gun going off inside the walls of the ship. The seams of the ship unzipped. The drone shows us gaps between the plates that are not jagged tears, but clean separations. This confirms that the fasteners failed long before the steel did. The crazy part is that the builders knew about the quality issues. There were shortages of high-quality iron, so they switched to a lower grade for the bow and the stern.
At the curved area of the bow, they had to drive rivets in manually. But steel rivets were too tough to hammer in. So instead they used wrought iron rivets, which are much more malleable.
The curved parts of the ship. And guess where the iceberg hit? Right in the bow. If the ship had been hit in the middle where the steel rivets were used, it might have survived. It is a game of inches and bad luck. And get this, the water that night was roughly 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Salt water can stay liquid below freezing. At that temperature, the steel used in 1912 behaves very differently than modern steel. Today, we put additives in steel to keep it flexible in the cold. Back then, they did not know to do that. So when the ship hit the ice, the hull was already shocked by the cold. It was rigid. Instead of bending, it cracked. The drone footage shows fracture lines that look like a shattered windshield. This explains why the ship broke apart so violently at the surface. The structure could not handle the stress of the stern lifting out of the water because the metal had lost all its elasticity. It is heartbreaking to realize that the passengers were placing their trust in a vessel that was chemically destined to fail in those conditions. They were dining in the first-class lounge, surrounded by wood paneling and crystal chandeliers, while the very skeleton of the ship was too weak to protect them. The luxury was just a mask. The drone drifts over the expansion joints. These are gaps in the superstructure meant to allow the ship to flex in the waves. The theory is that these joints were poorly designed and actually contributed to the ship snapping in half. The footage shows that the break happened exactly where these joints were located. The ship literally tore itself apart because it was too long and too rigid. We have to look at this from the perspective of 1912. They were pushing the boundaries of what was possible. They were building the biggest moving object ever made by human hands. But they were doing it with materials that were not ready for the challenge. It is like trying to build a spaceship out of wood. You can make it look good, but it will not hold up in a vacuum. The visual grandeur of the Titanic blinded everyone to these structural weaknesses. Even the captain, Edward Smith, believed the ship was unsinkable.
I think the position was taken that the ship was looked upon as being practically unsinkable. She was looked upon as a lifeboat herself.
He had 40 years of experience at sea. If he could be fooled by the marketing, what chance did the passengers have? They saw the 4 massive funnels, one of which was fake, by the way, just for looks, and they thought they were invincible. The drone camera zooms in on a piece of the hull lying in the mud. You can see the layers of paint still visible after a century. It is a reminder of the human effort that went into building this thing. Thousands of workers spent years hammering those rivets by hand. They had no idea they were sealing the fate of the ship with every swing of the hammer. This deep dive investigation reveals that the Titanic was not defeated by a monster iceberg. It was defeated by chemistry and economics. The owners wanted to save money and time. They compromised on the iron, they ignored the cold weather properties of the steel, and they paid the ultimate price. As the drone leaves the hull and moves toward the upper decks, we are about to see the most tragic evidence of all, the equipment that could have saved them but didn't. The drone spots the empty davits pointing toward a tragedy of numbers. Women and children, mostly. Now the drone rises to the boat deck. This is where the story shifts from engineering failure to human tragedy. The camera focuses on the davits, the small cranes used to lower the lifeboats. They are empty now, standing like lonely skeletons in the dark water. Seeing them down there, twisted and covered in rust, makes your stomach turn because you know what they represent. The Titanic had the capacity to carry 64 lifeboats. The designer, Thomas Andrews, wanted to include them. He knew the ship needed them, but the owners said no.
The captain and the designer then proceed down to the engine room to talk to the chief engineer, to try to figure out what can be done and what can be saved.
They thought 64 boats would clutter the deck and ruin the view for the first-class passengers. They wanted wide open spaces for walking and socializing, so they cut the number down to 20. Think about that. They traded safety for a nice view. Those 20 boats could only carry about 1,100 people. There were over 2,200 people on board. Do the math. Even if everything went perfectly, half the people were dead the moment the ship left port. There was literally no physical way to save everyone. But it gets worse. The drone glides over the area where the second-class and third-class entrances were. We have heard the stories about passengers being locked below decks. The footage shows remnants of barriers and gates. In 1912, American immigration laws required that third-class passengers, immigrants, be kept separate from the wealthy to prevent the spread of disease. These gates were real. When the alarm sounded, the stewards were confused. They did not have keys to all the gates. Many third-class families were trapped in a maze of corridors with water rising around their ankles while the gates remained locked. They were banging on the metal, screaming for help, while just a few decks above, the lifeboats were being lowered half empty. The drone captures the ghostly image of the promenade deck. This is where the band played. And yes, they really did play until the end. But the chaos here was unimaginable. Because there had been no lifeboat drill, the crew did not know how many people each boat could hold. They were afraid the davits would collapse if they filled the boats to capacity. So, do you think we have actually learned our lesson, or are we just waiting for the next unsinkable disaster to happen in space? It is scary to think about. If you want more deep-sea mysteries revealed, smash that like button and subscribe. You do not want to miss what we find next.